The sun always seemed to shine a little brighter on Maple Brook. It was that kind of town. The streets were clean, the gardens were neat, and people mostly got along. Everyone knew each other, at least by face, and news traveled not through the internet, but over garden fences and in the aisle of the one good grocery store. In a place like this, trust wasn't something you built. It was just there, in the air you breathed. And a lot of that trust was wrapped up in one man. Dr. Elias Vance. Dr. Vance wasn't just a doctor. He was a fixture. He had taken over the old osteopathy practice on Main Street from his father, and he treated his patients the same way like family. He remembered your kids' names, asked about your vacation, and had a calm, steady voice that could talk away worry. His hands, people said, were gifted. He could find a knot in your back you didn't even know was there and smooth it out. To the people of Maple Brook, he was more than a healthcare provider. He was a keeper of the town's well-being, a friendly face in a white coat who represented safety itself. Maya was a patient of Dr. Vance's. She was a quiet young woman, more comfortable with books than big conversations, studying library science at a college in the next town over. A persistent ache in her lower back from too many hours, hunched over textbooks, had brought her to his office. She, like everyone else, trusted him completely. Why wouldn't she? Her own mother went to him. Her friends did too. The office was always warm and smelled faintly of lavender. That day, the receptionist, a kind woman who had been there for years, gave Maya a warm smile and told her to go right in. Dr. Vance was expecting her. The room was dim, the blinds half closed against the afternoon sun. Dr. Vance was his usual self-friendly, smiling, asking about her studies. He put her at ease immediately. As she lay face down on the examination table, he began his work, his hands pressing along her spine, finding the points of tension. He talked softly about muscle groups and alignment. Maya tried to relax. Then he asked her to turn onto her side, facing away from him, one leg bent. The position felt a bit more vulnerable, but he was the expert. His hands moved to her lower back and hip area. The pressure changed. It felt different, not like the firm, therapeutic pressure from before, but something more intrusive, more personal. A sharp, wrong kind of pain shot through her. It wasn't the good hurt of a tight muscle releasing. It was a deep, violating ache. Without thinking, the words slipped out in a tense murmur, barely more than a breath. It hurts when I sit. For a second, the room was perfectly silent. Then, Dr. Vance let out a soft, professional chuckle. His hands didn't stop moving. Oh, that's just the sacrum releasing, Maya. His voice was smooth as honey. It can refer pain in funny ways. You're doing great. Just breathe through it. His explanation was logical, wrapped in medical terms. He was the doctor. She was the student with a bad back. Who was she to question what she was feeling? Doubt flooded her, hot and shameful. Maybe she was misinterpreting it. Maybe she was too sensitive. She clenched her jaw and stared at the pattern on the wallpaper until the session was over. When he was done, he helped her sit up, his manner once again completely normal, professional. You should feel looser in a day or two, he said, washing his hands at the sink. Take it easy. Maya nodded, her words stuck in her throat. She paid at the front desk, her face feeling hot, and walked out into the bright, normal sunlight of Main Street. The world looked the same, but she felt completely different. A sick, shaky feeling had taken root in her stomach. The drive home was a blur. That evening, she met her close friend for coffee. Her friend could see something was off. You okay? How was the doctor? Maya stirred her drink, the words battling inside her. Finally, she said, her voice low. It was weird. It hurt in a strange way. I told him it hurt when I sat, and he just said it was normal. Her friend tilted her head, then shrugged, taking a sip of her latte. Aunt Karen goes to him for her sciatica. She says he's a bit, hands-on. But he fixed her right up. He's supposed to be the best. The response was like a door gently closing. There was no malice in it, just the simple, unshakable trust of the town. He's the best. The message was clear. The problem must be with her perception, not with Dr. Vance's actions. The doubt grew stronger, mixing with the shame. She started to bury the memory, to try and convince herself she had imagined the violating nature of the touch. She avoided sitting for too long, and when the strange pain flared, she told herself it was just her bad back. She didn't go back for a follow-up, making excuses about her schedule. The town of Maple Brook, in all its quiet, friendly normalcy, had looked away from her silent distress, simply by refusing to even consider it might be real. Her whisper was lost in the wind of the town's unwavering faith. But a whisper, once made, never truly disappears. It just waits for the right ear to hear it. The whisper found its way to David Shun almost by accident. It was a soft echo, passed from Maya's mother to David's wife during one of their regular weekend phone calls. The two women were old friends, and they talked about everything: their gardens, recipes, their children. Maya's mother mentioned, with a mother's quiet worry, that her daughter hadn't been herself lately. She was jumpy and kept complaining about a back pain that just wouldn't go away. Even after seeing Dr. Vance, she repeated Maya's odd, specific phrase. She even said it hurts her to sit. Can you imagine? David's wife, sympathetic, shared the story with him later that evening as they washed dishes together. Poor girl, she said, handing him a wet plate to dry. Sounds miserable. But if Dr. Vance can't fix it, I don't know who can. David, a man of careful habit, simply nodded, wiping the plate clean. But his mind, trained as a high school biology teacher to observe details and question how things worked, didn't let the comment go. It stuck there, like a burr on his sweater. It hurts when I sit. He turned the phrase over in his mind. He wasn't a medical doctor, but he understood human anatomy. He knew a spinal adjustment, even a rough one, might cause generalized soreness. But a localized pain specifically when sitting? That pointed to something very particular, a very specific area of the body. A small, cold knot of suspicion began to form in his stomach. He didn't want it to be there. He liked Maple Brook. He appreciated the town's peace after years teaching in a big, noisy city school. He had no desire to stir up trouble, especially not based on a fragment of a story heard third hand. But the detail was too precise. It felt like a single, clear puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture everyone else was looking at. He decided, quietly, to do a little reading. It wasn't an investigation, he told himself. It was just curiosity. After his wife went to bed, he would sit at the old desk in their spare room, the glow of his laptop the only light. He typed in careful, clinical search terms. He read osteopathic journals about proper techniques for pelvic adjustments. He immersed himself in dry, professional forums where therapists discussed ethics and patient boundaries. The more he read, the colder the knot in his stomach became. He learned about the strict protocols. He learned that, for any internal or sensitive examination, there should be clear consent, a detailed explanation, and crucially, the option of a chaperone another person in the room. Always. He read sober, heartbreaking accounts from faraway places about a specific, horrific violation. Predators using the guise of internal muscle therapy to assault patients. The medical term for it was clinical and cold, but the described impact, the shame, the confusion, the physical sensation was devastatingly human. And one of the most common things victims reported, saying was some version of, "It hurts when I sit." David leaned back in his chair, the hum of the computer suddenly loud in the quiet room. He looked out the window at the dark, sleeping street. In one of those neat, friendly houses was Dr. Vance, the town's trusted healer. In another was Maya, a young woman living with a secret fear she couldn't even name. And now David knew. He had a theory, a dark and terrible one that made perfect, awful sense. But a theory, especially one this serious, was nothing without proof. He couldn't go to the police with a Google search and a gut feeling. He couldn't destroy a man's life and append his own peaceful existence on a suspicion. He needed to know more. He started listening differently. At the town's summer barbecue, he lingered near a group of nurses who worked at the local clinic. He heard one say lightly, "Oh, I wouldn't let Vance near me without a chaperone. He's a little too free with his treatments." The others laughed, but it was a knowing laugh, not a joking one. It was a piece of gossip, brushed off as just how he is. At the library, he struck up a conversation with the woman at the desk, an older lady who knew everyone. He mentioned, casually, that his wife was thinking of seeing Dr. Vance for her hip. The librarian lowered her voice. "He's very thorough. Sometimes a bit too much for some folks' liking. My niece saw him once and never went back. She said he gave her the creeps, but she couldn't say why." Each fragment was small. A shrug, a lowered voice, a quick change of subject. No one was making an accusation. They were just sharing the unspoken, minor unease that everyone seemed to quietly accept about the doctor. The town wasn't hiding a secret. It was sitting on top of it, comfortably, refusing to look underneath. David began to keep a simple notebook. Not a dramatic log, just a teacher's notes. Dates, initials, snippets of conversations. He wasn't building a legal case. He was trying to see if the pattern in his head existed in the real world. And slowly, painfully, it did. There was a trail of subtle discomfort, mostly among younger women, all brushed aside by the overwhelming reputation of the man. He knew he had to talk to Maya. It was the step he dreaded most. To approach a young woman he barely knew and give voice to her worst, unspoken fear. To suggest something so vile. He wrestled with it for days. Was it his place? What if he was wrong and he traumatized her further? But what if he was right and he was the only one listening? Finally, he asked his wife to arrange it, saying he had some information about a specialist for chronic back pain that might help her friend's daughter. It was a thin excuse, but it worked. They met at the quiet public park, on a bench away from the playground. Maya looked nervous, unsure why her mother's friend's husband wanted to talk to her. David was gentle, his voice soft. He didn't mention his theory. He just said he'd heard she was in pain, and that sometimes pain had a cause that wasn't easy to see. He asked, very carefully, if she could describe exactly what happened in Dr. Vance's office. He listened, not as a detective, but as a teacher, nodding slowly. When she haltingly repeated the story, her voice barely above a whisper, and said those words again, "It hurt when I sat," David felt a profound sorrow. He looked at her, his expression serious but kind. "Maya," he said, "I need you to understand something. What you're describing, it's not normal procedure. It's not okay. And you are not crazy for feeling violated." For the first time since that day in the dim office, Maya's eyes filled not with confused shame, but with a kind of horrified recognition. Someone had finally heard her whisper, and they had believed it. The looking away was over. Now the seeing had begun. The meeting in the park changed everything and nothing. For Maya, the validation was a tidal wave. The shaky, sick feeling she'd been carrying solidified into a cold, hard stone of anger and betrayal. She wasn't crazy. The problem wasn't in her head. David Shun, a soft-spoken teacher she barely knew, had looked at her broken pieces and seen the whole ugly picture she couldn't even describe. She went home and cried, not from shame this time, but from a furious, grieving relief. For David, the meeting confirmed his worst fears. He now had a first-hand account, a real person attached to the clinical details he'd read online. The puzzle piece didn't just fit. It clicked into place with a sound that made him feel ill. He had a moral obligation to act, but he felt utterly out of his depth. He was a biology teacher, not a detective or a lawyer. The sheer weight of what he was considering taking on the most respected man in a small, close-knit town was terrifying. He knew the police would be his first stop, but he also knew how it would look. A newcomer, a teacher, walking in with a story he'd heard from a young woman, about a phrase he'd researched on the internet, Dr. Vance's word against his. And Maya's word, he feared, might waver under pressure. The town's trust was a fortress, and he was outside with a small, fragile key. He decided he needed more. One story, however powerful, could be dismissed as a misunderstanding. He needed to see if there was a pattern others had missed or chosen to ignore. He had to build a foundation so that when he finally spoke up, it wouldn't just be his voice in the wind. His approach was cautious, born of a teacher's patience. He started with public records, things anyone could find. He spent evenings at the town library's microfiche machine, his eyes straining at the glowing green screen. He looked for any trace of Dr. Vance's past. He found the article from 15 years ago, welcoming the young Dr. Vance home to take over his father's practice. He found charity event photos, the doctor smiling in the center. It was all perfectly pristine. But then, digging deeper into professional licensing boards from the state Vance had briefly practiced in before coming home, David found a ghost. Not a formal complaint, but a note. An inquiry had been opened years ago. It was closed quickly, marked resolved, no further action. There were no details, but the mere existence of it was a crack in the perfect facade. Someone, somewhere, had once had a question. Armed with this faint shadow of doubt, David began the harder work, talking to people. He couldn't just ask outright. In a town like Maplebrook, direct questions about Dr. Vance would raise alarms and shut doors. So he used his position, his natural calm. He became a listener. He volunteered to help set up for the annual church fair. He made small talk with the women running the bake sale, many of whom were of an age to have seen every doctor in town. He mentioned, casually, that he'd heard such good things about Dr. Vance, but that his wife was a bit shy about medical stuff. "Oh, he's lovely," one woman said, frosting a cupcake. "Though my daughter, when she was in her 20s, she stopped going to him. Said he was a bit much. You know how young people are, always so sensitive." At a school board meeting, he fell into step with the practice's former receptionist, who had retired the year before. He asked how she was enjoying retirement. "It's quieter," she said, with a sigh that seemed to carry more weight than just missing work. When David gently steered the conversation to her old job, her face became carefully neutral. "It was a good job. Dr. Vance is a very dedicated physician." Then, after a pause, she added, looking straight ahead, "He did prefer to see some patients alone. Didn't like interruptions. We were told to keep the schedule light for certain procedures." She then quickly changed the subject to the weather. Each conversation was like this: a breadcrumb, a hint, a sentence that trailed off. He heard phrases like old-fashioned, hands-on approach, and not for everyone, and some. Girls just don't like that kind of deep tissue work. He met a young mother at the playground who mentioned in passing that her physical therapist had been horrified when she described a treatment Vance had given her for tailbone pain after childbirth. She said that was completely outside the scope of what he should be doing, the woman said, bouncing her toddler on her knee. "But I figured, he's the expert, right?" David's notebook filled up. He didn't write down names, just initials, dates, and these echoing phrases. He created a simple timeline. He saw it, a trail of subtle, hushed discomfort stretching back years, always smoothed over by the doctor's reputation, by the patient's own self-doubt, by the town's collective desire to not see anything ugly. The most difficult moment came when he tracked down a woman who had moved away from Maple Brook a few years prior. He found her through an old community newsletter. He called her, his heart pounding, introducing himself as a teacher looking into community health resources. When he cautiously mentioned hearing some varied experiences about Dr. Vance's methods, the line went quiet for a long time. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was flat and tired. "I wondered if anyone would ever ask," she said. She told him a story that mirrored Maya's in its awful details. The dim room, the confusing pain, the phrase about sitting. She had told her mother, who told her she must have misunderstood. She had told her husband, who got angry and said she shouldn't have gone back. She had buried it, moved away, and tried to forget. "You're the first person who hasn't made me feel like I was making it up," she said, and he could hear her crying softly. David hung up the phone and put his head in his hands. The pattern wasn't just theory anymore. It was real, and it was repeated. He had multiple voices now, all whispering the same awful truth. The fortress of trust wasn't built on a solid rock. It was built over a deep, dark well of silence. He knew what he had to do. He arranged all his notes, the timeline, the phrases, the record of the old inquiry, the accounts from Maya and the woman who had moved away, all carefully written without identifying the latter. He made copies. He told his wife everything, seeing the shock and fear in her eyes, but also her steadying support. Then, one crisp autumn morning, he walked into the Maple Brook police station. He asked to speak to a detective, not about a crime, he said, but about a pattern of concern. He was nervous, his palms damp, but his voice was steady. He laid out his simple notebook and the copies on the desk. "I believe," he said, choosing his words with a teacher's care, "that there is a predator in our town, and he's been hiding in the brightest possible light." The journey from a murmured complaint in a park to an official police report was complete. The looking away was officially over. Now, the difficult process of making everyone else see would begin. The Maple Brook police station was a small, quiet building that mostly dealt with lost dogs, minor traffic disputes, and the occasional shoplifting incident from the Main Street pharmacy. The detective who listened to David Chun that morning was a man named Inspector Walsh. He was nearing retirement, with a kind, tired face that had seen a lot of Maple Brook's simpler times. He listened patiently as David laid out his notebook, speaking in his careful teacher's way. David talked about patterns, about medical ethics, about phrases that echoed. He handed over his timeline. Inspector Walsh scanned the pages, his expression unreadable. When David finished, the room was silent for a long moment. "That's a very serious thing you're suggesting about Dr. Vance," Walsh finally said, his voice gravelly. He didn't sound dismissive, just heavily aware of the weight of it. "I know," David said. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe it was true. I'm not asking for an arrest. I'm just asking for someone to look, really look." Walsh sighed, a deep, weary sound. He knew David by reputation a quiet, solid man, not a troublemaker. The meticulous notes were impressive, but he also knew the storm this would cause. Investigating Dr. Vance was like deciding to cut down the town's oldest, most beloved tree. The roots went deep, and everyone enjoyed its shade. "I'll look at it," Walsh said, making it clear that was all he was promising. "But understand, Mr. Chun, without a formal complaint from a victim willing to press charges, there's very little we can do." David understood. He left the station feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. The stone was in the pond. Now he had to wait for the ripples. The ripples at first were almost invisible. Inspector Walsh started making discreet calls. He spoke to the retired receptionist. He tracked down the woman who had moved away, who, empowered by David's belief, gave a formal statement over the phone. He reviewed the old, closed inquiry from the other state. It was like gathering mist, but slowly a shape began to form in the haze. It was the pattern David had seen, a pattern of boundary violations, of procedures that crossed lines, of young women left confused and ashamed. The break came from an unexpected place. One of the women Walsh spoke to, a former patient in her late 20s, was furious. Her experience had been a dark secret she carried for years, and the detective's call unleashed a powerful anger. When Walsh explained the limitations, how hard these cases were to prove, she didn't hesitate. "What if you could hear him?" she asked, her voice tight. "What if you could hear him say it?" She agreed to wear a wire. It was a risky, dramatic step, the kind of thing that happened in city crime dramas, not in Maple Brook. The plan was simple and terrifying. She would call Dr. Vance's office, saying she'd moved back to the area and was having a return of her old pelvic pain. She would request an appointment, a specific adjustment he'd done before. The goal wasn't to recreate a crime, but to get him to talk about his methods on record, to elicit statements that would confirm the nature of his treatments. The day of the appointment felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. David knew nothing about it. The police kept it sealed tight. The woman, her heart hammering against her ribs, walked into the familiar office. The lavender smell, the dim light, it all brought the old fear rushing back. But this time, beneath her clothes was a small device, and in a van down the street, Inspector Walsh listened. Dr. Vance was as charming as ever. He remembered her. He was so glad she'd returned. As she lay on the table, following the same script as before, she steered the conversation, her voice shaky but clear. "I just get so nervous about this kind of internal work," she said, as he prepared. His response was smooth, confident, and on the recording, it was damning. "Oh, don't you worry," he said, his voice a low, reassuring murmur. "I've been doing this for decades. It's a specialized technique my father taught me. Most osteopaths are too timid. They don't understand you have to be direct. It might feel intrusive, but that's how you get results. Remember last time? You said you felt so much better." He was justifying it. He was describing, in his own voice, a procedure that was far outside normal practice, admitting it felt intrusive, and using his authority to dismiss that concern. He was weaving his own confession into a tapestry of care. She left the office, went straight to the prearranged meeting spot, and handed over the recording device. She was trembling, but her jaw was set. "Did you get it?" she asked Walsh. He nodded, his face grim. "We got it." With that recording, everything changed. It was no longer a matter of "he said, she said." It was his own voice, describing his unorthodox, violating methods. It was the key. Walsh now had probable cause to execute a search warrant on Dr. Vance's office and home. The arrest happened early on a Tuesday morning. It was quiet, professional. Dr. Vance was taken from his home in a bathrobe, looking bewildered and then coldly furious. He said only one thing: "This is a misunderstanding. My patients will support me." But the fortress of trust was crumbling. The search of his office revealed more notebooks with coded, disturbing notes about patients' responsiveness to certain treatments. Old appointment books that showed a pattern of booking specific, younger female patients for longer sessions at the end of the day. When the staff had left, the news exploded through Maple Brook like a shockwave. The local paper's headline was a single staggering word: arrested. People gathered in hushed clusters on the street, in the coffee shop, their faces pale with disbelief. "It can't be true," was the common refrain. "Not Dr. Vance." But then, a powerful thing began to happen. The arrest and the serious charges that followed acted like a beacon in the dark. It told other women, silently carrying their own pain, that they might be believed. One by one, they started to come forward. A college student, a young mother from a neighboring town, a woman who was now a lawyer in the city. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar. The dim room, the confusing pain, the phrase about sitting, the crushing self-doubt afterward. Maya, seeing the strength of the first woman who wore the wire, found her own courage. With her mother beside her, she walked into the police station and gave her formal statement. She said the words out loud for the record. She cried, but her voice didn't waver. David watched it all from the edges. He didn't give interviews. He didn't seek credit. He saw the town struggling through its grief and betrayal. He saw the angry supporters of Dr. Vance, who claimed it was a witch hunt. But mostly, he saw the women, their shoulders straightening as they realized they were not alone. The whisper had started with one young woman's pain. It had been heard by one man who refused to look away. Now, it had grown into a chorus of voices, strong enough to shake the foundations of a town. The looking away was over. Now came the painful, necessary reckoning. The trial of Dr. Elias Vance was not held in Maple Brook. The courthouse was in the county seat, a larger, impersonal city of stone and glass. This felt right. The story had outgrown the town's garden fences and quiet streets. It needed a bigger, starker stage. For weeks, the community carpooled to the courthouse. It became a grim daily commute. Some went out of loyalty to the doctor, sitting stiffly in the rows behind him. But many more went for the women. They sat behind the prosecutor, a silent wall of support. The air in the courtroom was heavy, like before a storm. Maya was one of the first to testify. Walking to the stand, she felt every eye on her. She saw Dr. Vance at the defense table, looking smaller in a plain suit, his face a careful mask. She found David Chun in the crowd. He gave her a small, steady nod. She took a breath. The prosecutor was gentle. He asked her to tell the court what happened. She started slowly, her voice thin in the big room. She described the office, the lavender smell, the friendly chatter. Then she described the change in pressure, the wrong kind of pain. And finally, she repeated the words she had murmured that day, the words that had started it all. "I told him it hurts when I sit." The defense attorney rose for cross-examination. His voice was loud, trying to poke holes. Did she have a history of back problems? Yes. Could she be confusing a legitimate medical procedure with something else? Was it possible she was simply embarrassed by a necessary treatment? Maya felt the old shame try to rise up. But then she looked at the doctor, not with fear, but with a clear, cold certainty. "I know the difference," she said, her voice finding its strength. "I know what pain from an injury feels like. This was not that. He was not helping me. He was hurting me." One by one, the other women took the stand. Their stories wove together, a tapestry of violation. A young mother described being told her postpartum pain required an internal adjustment. A college athlete spoke of being assured his special technique would help her hip flexor, leaving her sore and humiliated for weeks. The woman who had worn the wire recounted her experience, and the recording of Dr. Vance's own justifying words was played for the silent courtroom. His voice, so reassuring in his office, now sounded chilling. A textbook example of grooming and exploitation. The defense argued tirelessly. Dr. Vance was an unconventional healer. A genius even, misunderstood by those who didn't appreciate his advanced methods. His hands-on approach was legendary, the reason for his success. The women, the lawyer suggested, had colluded. their memories twisted by suggestion and gossip. But the evidence was too much. The appointment books showing his pattern, his own clinical notes with their creepy observations, and most of all, the sheer number of voices, strangers to each other, all telling the same specific story. The phrase, "It hurts when I sit," became a haunting refrain, a thread connecting each of their nightmares. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed, tense. The jury filed in, their faces giving nothing away. When the foreman stood and read "guilty" on the first count, a soft, collective gasp went through the room. And then another, and another. "Guilty, guilty, guilty." Dr. Vance showed no emotion, just a slow closing of his eyes. The fortress had finally fallen. At the sentencing hearing, Maya chose to speak. She faced the man who had stolen her sense of safety from her own body. "You used our trust like a weapon," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "You hid behind your title and this town's goodwill. But you underestimated us. You underestimated one man who chose to listen. And you underestimated the sound of all our voices, finally speaking together." The judge called the crimes a monstrous breach of trust and a systematic predation hidden by reputation. He sentenced Elias Vance to decades in prison, ensuring he would be an old man, if ever, when he saw freedom again. Back in Maple Brook, the aftermath was complex. The town was left with a scar. Some people felt a deep shame for their own blindness. Others remained stubbornly in denial, believing their friend had been railroaded. The Vance sign was taken down from the osteopathy office, which sat empty for a long time. But from the damage, new things slowly grew. The women, bound by a terrible shared experience, found solace in each other. They had dinners, supported each other through difficult days, and celebrated small victories in healing. They were no longer just victims. They were survivors, and their friendship was a testament to their strength. Maya finished her degree. She sometimes thought about that younger version of herself, drowning in doubt. She felt a protective tenderness for that girl. She had learned a hard lesson about the world, but also about her own resilience. David Chun never wanted to be a hero. He went back to teaching biology, to his quiet life with his wife. The town gave him an award at a quiet ceremony. He accepted it awkwardly, thanked them, and put it in a drawer. To him, he had simply done what was right. He had connected the dots others refused to see. His greatest reward was seeing Maya and the others reclaim their lives. The story of Maplebrook became a cautionary tale that spread, a reminder that evil doesn't always lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes it works in a warm, lavender-scented room, dressed in a white coat and a smile. It thrives not in secrecy, but in the silence of those who choose, for comfort's sake, to look away. But the story also carries a sea of hope. It reminds us that a single whisper, however faint, matters. That one person listening with empathy and courage can break a cycle of silence. It shows that trust should be earned through actions, not given blindly with a title. And it proves that even the most perfect-looking town can harbor shadows, but also that within it, there can be ordinary people capable of extraordinary justice. The echo of that first murmur, "It hurts when I sit," will always be a sound of warning, but also, forever, a sound of courage found and a silence finally broken.